आज हम फिर आ चुके हैं टॉप 100 क्वेश्चंस के साथ, जो कि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हैं और यूजीसी नेट के एग्ज़ाम में पूछे जाते हैं। और ये सेशन आप लोगों को पसंद आएगा, तो विदाउट वेस्टिंग आवर टाइम लेट स्टार्ट दिस सेशन। द फर्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज, हु wrote the play Macbeth? It is very easy. William Shakespeare. The second question is, who is the author of Pride and Prejudice? Jane Austen. The Waste Land was written by T.S. Eliot. Who wrote the famous work Don Quixote? Miguel de Cervantes. Who is known as the father of modern English poetry? W.B. Yeats. Who wrote the novel Ulysses? James Joyce. The poem Ode to a Nightingale was written by John Keats. Who wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray? Oscar Wilde. Who is the author of Canterbury Tales? Geoffrey Chaucer. To the Lighthouse was written by Virginia Woolf. Who is considered the father of English literature? Geoffrey Chaucer. Who wrote Frankenstein? Mary Shelley. Who wrote The Metamorphosis? Franz Kafka. Which of the following works is a tragedy by William Shakespeare? Hamlet. Who wrote The Old Man and the Sea? Old Man and the Sea is written by Ernest Hemingway. Which of the following is a work by Charles Dickens? Which of the following is a work by Charles Dickens? Moby Dick, written by Herman Melville. Who wrote Wuthering Heights? Emily Bronte. Who wrote Jane Eyre? Charlotte Bronte. The Rime of Ancient Mariner is written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. The Catcher in the Rye was written by J.S. Salinger. Who wrote Sons and the Lovers? D.H. Lawrence. Who is the author of 1984? George Orwell. Who wrote Heart of Darkness? Joseph Conrad. Who wrote the famous play Waiting for Godot? Samuel Beckett. Who is the author of Brave New World? Aldous Huxley. Who wrote The Road Not Taken? Robert Frost. The Scarlet Letter was written by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Who wrote Moby Dick? Herman Melville. The Divine Comedy was written by Dante Alighieri. Who wrote the novel The Great Gatsby? F. Scott Fitzgerald. The Sun Also Rises is a work Ernest Hemingway. Who wrote Crime and Punishment? Fyodor Dostoevsky. Who wrote Brothers Karamazov? Fyodor Dostoevsky. Who wrote The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Huckleberry Finn. Mark Twain. Finn Twain. Who wrote Dracula? Bram Stoker. Who is the author of The Grapes of Wrath? John Steinbeck. The famous phrase, all the world is a stage, is from which Shakespearean play, As You Like It? The poem My Last Duchess was written by Robert Browning, the famous poem. Who is known as the prophet of the modern word in poetry? S.T. Coleridge. Who wrote The Importance of Being Earnest? Oscar Wilde. Who is the author of Turn of Screw? Henry James. Of Mice and Men was written by John Steinbeck. The Tempest is a play by William Shakespeare. Who wrote The Crying of Lot 49? Thomas Sacon. Who wrote the novel Mrs. Dalloway? Virginia Woolf. Who wrote The Stranger? Albert Camus. Who wrote The Trial? Franz Kafka. Who wrote The Tale of Two Cities? Charles Dickens. To His Quiet Mistress is a poem written by Andrew Marvell. Who wrote A Passage to India? E.M. Forster. Who wrote The Sea? John Banville. Who is the author of Wide Sargasso Sea? Jean Rice. Who wrote Beloved? Toni Morrison. Who wrote The Bell Jar? Sylvia Plath. The Color Purple was written by Alice Walker. Who wrote The Sun Also Rises? Ernest Hemingway. Waiting for Godot is a famous play written by Samuel Beckett. Who wrote The Handmaid's Tale? Margaret Atwood. The Unquiet Grave was written by Christina Rossetti. Who is the author of The Road? Cormac McCarthy. Who wrote The Waste Land? T.S. Eliot. The novel Lord of the Flies was written by William Golding. The famous phrase, I think, therefore I am, is attributed to Rene Descartes, who wrote The Second Coming, W.B. Yeats, who wrote the Canterbury Tales, Geoffrey Chaucer. The Sound and the Fury was written by William Faulkner, who is the author of A Clockwork Orange, Anthony Vargas, who wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde, who wrote the novel The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck, who wrote Crime and the Punishment, Fyodor Dostoevsky, who is the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Douglas Adams, who wrote The Republic, Plato. The Bell Jar was written by Sylvia Plath. The Road Not Taken is a poem by Robert Frost, who wrote the famous line, Do I Dare Disturb the Universe? J. Alfred Prufrock from T.S. Eliot's The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, who wrote The House of Seven Gables, Nathaniel Hawthorne, who wrote The Mist of Avalon, Marion Zimmer Bradley, who wrote the novel Big Gregory Maguire. In Memoriam is a poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson, who wrote the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, Harmer Lee, who wrote The Road, Cormac McCarthy, who wrote Siddhartha, Herman Hesse, who wrote WSI, Toni Morrison, who wrote The Unbearable Lightness of Being, Milan Kundera. The Golden Notebook was written by Doris Lessings, who wrote the famous quote, Not all those who wander are lost. J.R.R. Tolkien, who is the author of The Blackest Word. Walter Moss, who wrote the epic Paradise Lost. John Milton, A Room of One's Own was written by Virginia Woolf, who wrote the Canterbury Tales. Geoffrey Chaucer, The Sun Also Rises was written by Ernest Hemingway, who is the author of Mrs. Dalloway, Virginia Woolf. The Yellow Wallpaper is a short story written by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, who wrote Frankenstein. Mary Shelley, who wrote The Time Machine. H.G. Wells, The Bell Jar is a novel by Sylvia Plath, who wrote The Glass Menagerie, Tennessee Williams. The Divine Comedy is an epic written by Dante Alighieri, who is the author of The English Patient. Michael. All questions are done here.